we often talk about IQ as being very important, doing well in school, whatever, but we often kind of look over EQ. Like, why is EQ like important? Or let's roll back. What is EQ, and then why is it important?
Yeah, so to number one say like EQ is emotional intelligence, and the great quote that you added on this was IQ gets you hired, but EQ gets you promoted. And EQ can be defined as EQ is a catch-all term used to describe our ability to accurately perceive, express, appraise, understand, and regulate emotions in ourselves and others. So again, this is really important because no matter how smart you are, and especially as engineers, this is something like, me and Ben are learning and like I'm figuring out is you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't know how to interact with people, everything in this world is based on how you work with someone.
Right.
Cooperation, communication, it's all based on how you work with someone. So if you don't have a good emotional intelligence, you don't know how to control your emotions, you don't know how to read the room, you don't know how to, accurately talk to someone in the right situations and everything, like it doesn't matter. They're
Yeah.
not going to like you, and especially if you're talking to someone of power, like they're going to be like, why would I give this kid a job? I don't care how
Right.
smart he is. Like he doesn't understand our culture. He doesn't work well with anybody. And so this is really important, but there's 4 areas of EQ, and this maybe seems pretty obvious to people. There's self-awareness and self-management. So that deals with more yourself, obviously, right? And then the last 2 is social awareness and relationship management. And relationship management has a lot to do with interpersonal communication skills, right? Because really in a relationship, like
Right.
how are you going to know how we're doing if we're not communicating, right? But so honing in on the last 2, because self-awareness, self-management, that's something that kind of really you can get a good understanding of it from our first episode on figuring out your purpose and
Yeah.
your intrinsic values. That'll help you reflect on like your.
And we're gonna hit more on this later in future
Oh,
episodes.
without a doubt, facts,
No
without
question.
a doubt. But can you elaborate on like social awareness and relationships, and maybe what skills would help
Yeah,
develop that?
and really, the kind of like the whole thing, like like the first 2 are EQ with yourself and who you are, and the last 2 are EQ with like groups of people. And so when you think about why EQ is important, just kind of going back real quick, like a different way to look at it is EQ is just your ability to communicate with others and understand how others feel and act, and like your ideas about how other people function, right? And so your chief goal and why EQ is important is because if you can't communicate and effectively interact with others, your ideas on what you want to do in the world can never be transferred to other people, for because they don't like you or they don't understand what you're saying, and then you can't be effective. You literally are just, you can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
Which is why you need to develop this EQ. But going from there, there's 2 very critical skills that you need to focus on, and that is active listening and empathy. And we've talked about active listening and how to win friends and influence people,
Yeah.
and that's huge. I would actually say if you ever get the chance to meet Mel, he's one of the best listeners I've ever met in my life.
Really?
Yes.
Sometimes I'll be like, what they talking about? Like, that's one question. No, I'm kidding.
No,
But
he
yeah.
really is. And just, it's so important to just, I think, I was talking to Andrew about this. One of the things that Mark Cuban does is he makes it a goal in every conversation to listen more than he talks. Okay. And that's a really good goal, I think, to listen more than you're speaking, because you can understand so much about someone else. And active listening isn't just like hearing them, it's listening to what they're saying, synthesizing what they're saying, comprehending, and then asking them even more questions, going deeper and trying to going into that, right?
Communication is useless without comprehension.
Exactly. And so just some quick, like easy go-to applications for how to improve your active listening and your empathy skills are going to be pause before speaking, acting, or reacting, be clear on your motives, be accountable for your flaws, monitor and overwrite negative self-talk, and widen your emotional vocabulary. And so, yeah,